Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak today about research ethics, specifically for teachers and pre-service teachers moving into the workplace. My presentation, as you know, is called Preparing the Next Generation of In-Service Teachers and looking at what we need to equip them to be ethical teachers, especially when it comes to research. So I don't want to go into too much detail about the teacher as researcher, because I understand it was covered yesterday. And I did do a debriefing session with my colleague last night, talking about what was spoken about in terms of the teacher as researcher. And she finished off by saying, it was so interesting because we spoke about everything except ethics. And I was right, that's what I'm talking about. So that's good that we meshed like that. So the teacher as researcher, as you know, it needs to happen as a skill that a teacher needs to have in order to develop themselves professionally, to influence policy and practice. They are agents of change, and of course the world of work. But I see my K on work has been cut off there, so the world of war, which is quite apt for the classroom, is something that is integral to being part of being a teacher. But what we need to understand from the outset is that a teacher deals with two types of ethics. There is ethics of the profession, so professional ethics, and then there's the ethics of research. And they cannot actually be separated, but they are different. So we just need to remember that when I talk about what I'm going to be talking about today. When I prepared my presentation, I was also very aware of the fact that I did not want this to be a lecture on ethics. So excuse me if it does come across as slight lecture, but I've tried to integrate the different ethical aspects of research into in-service teaching, together with pre-service teaching leading into in-service teaching. Okay, so as I said earlier, and as my colleagues said yesterday, the teacher as researcher is always seeking to learn from what happens in the classroom. They are innovators, they are curriculum drivers, agents of school change, and of course, directors of their own personal knowledge. Now, the types of research that a teacher would engage in, which has different ethical aspects, would be researching their own pedagogy, and we know how important that is with the rise of SOTL, with the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, with the changing curriculum all the time, especially you know in South Africa how many variations of the curriculum we've been through in the last 25 years. They need to be on top of that. Class sizes and social issues in our schools demand that teachers research their own classroom management, planning, expanding their knowledge, but also teachers are statisticians. They work out averages for tests. They change their teaching, hopefully, to adjust to the needs according to the statistics that they produce. So they are researchers, even if they don't realize they are researchers. And most research that happens in the classroom is action research, which links with this metacognition that was spoken about yesterday, the ability to reflect. I'm not going to labor that point, but this is where the issue comes in. Educational research and ethics in educational research has usually been the realm of academia or postgraduate studies. We go to great lengths to make sure that our postgraduate students are trained in ethics. They undergo incredibly regulated processes of research proposals, presenting them ethics proposals. Every research project is planned right down to the last minute. But there definitely is a gap in the undergraduate program, because undergraduates usually do not do a research project that has been regulated by the university. They do personal research in the classroom, or when the pre-service teachers go into the classroom during teaching practice, they do assignments, which is considered research, and the children in the classroom are the participants. And that is where the issue comes in with our training and our lack of training. It's at undergraduate level for that aspect. So research has shown a number of things. The first one I want to talk about is a study that was done by Creel et al. In 2021. She was my PhD student, so if you want to look for the article, you can use my surname too. She did a study that went and looked at 17 universities in South Africa and did a document analysis of the available codes of conduct for pre-service teaching practice, had a look at interviewing teaching practice coordinators and students, and realized at the end of the day that there is the codes of conduct that do exist for teachers. Most places don't have codes of conduct, let alone codes of ethics or codes of ethical conduct. Nothing is standardized. And those that do have codes of conduct, they are normative. They regulate behavior. They don't regulate research and they don't regulate ethics. And yeah, this is hugely problematic. So the reason that ethics isn't usually integrated into an undergraduate program is that it's usually seen as the realm of very serious research. Now, I would argue that all undergraduate research that is done is serious research, but that's the attitude that is given to ethics. It's not my problem, that's serious research. Undergraduate research is mostly linked to literature reviews and writing papers, not research projects. So they're not trained in not only research methodology, but in ethics. And it has been found, and this is not only in South Africa, this is a global phenomenon, that ethics may be addressed in certain courses, but very seldom, unless the course lends itself to that, like in law, for example. It's not very often that you find standalone subjects or modules in education that address ethics. And this is something that needs to be addressed. Okay, so as I said, there is the codes of conduct that do exist both for teaching practice and in-service teachers do not cover research or ethics. So what are research ethics? Now, this is where I have to be careful of not lecturing. Research ethics basically comes down to the idea that it is an application of fundamental ethical principles to research activities based on moral principles. Now, that's where the problem comes in terms of what is moral and what is morality to you, and it's these sorts of issues that take a lot of deep thinking and philosophical questioning, but that's not the purpose of my talk today. We're just going to look at specifically for pre-service teachers how this needs to be addressed and the problems that they might encounter. So the very first rule when it comes to ethics is do no harm. That is the basic rule in ethics across the board, whether you're dealing with medicine, whether you're dealing with educational research, whether you're doing business ethics, the rule is do no harm. And that means that you have to practice beneficence, not maleficence. And you have to make sure that you avoid potentially harmful situations or implications of research. And research should always be helpful. It should never place the participant in any type of dangerous position, whether that dangerous position be physically or psychologically or emotionally. And some literature even speaks about socially, but I'll get to that now. So do no harm is the first aspect that has to be addressed in the classroom. In terms of when you do research using the learners in the class as participants. The dangers of unregulated research and do no harm is where the issue comes in. In-service teachers and pre-service teachers are not trained in the ethics of research. So they might engage with sensitive issues. They might engage with learners who are vulnerable. There might be social justice issues. And if the teacher or the pre-service teacher is not trained specifically in how to engage with these issues, or even just how to think about them ethically, there will be a problem. There have been problems. Okay, so when it comes to teaching, the rights of the participants are very important. I'm going to mention each of these now. But the most important thing that we need to remember is that we work with learners, we work with children, and children are considered high-risk participants. So in medicine or in, like at CPT, we have the Faculty of Health and Wellness. All of their ethics applications or research applications are incredibly regulated and are considered high risk. What we don't realize is that exactly the same applies to education, because children are considered high risk. So it pushes every research project that you're doing, or any type of research that you're doing in the classroom, into that high risk category, and needs very specific monitoring, or at least educating. So determining risk is important to teach pre-service teachers, specifically because if you are just looking at your own teaching practice or classroom management, or even just reading up about certain things, eventually you're going to try it out in the classroom, and then your learners become your guinea pigs, and then they become your participants in your informal research. And teachers need to be aware of that. So determining risk is something that also needs to be included in anything that is taught. Children as participants, as I said, are highly problematic because we know we have a Charter of Human Rights that have been regulated by the UN. We have all kinds of issues around cultural issues, gender considerations. And of course, we have vulnerable children such as orphans, refugees, or children without guardians in the classroom. And as 2 slides back or 3 slides back, these things that a teacher could do that could be triggering when conducting research with these children, it needs to be looked at. A big issue for me always with teachers is, and when I get to conflict of interest, I'll discuss that there, but it's this dynamic, the power dynamic between the teacher and the learner. Is it ethical to conduct research on someone that you have power over? And how do you negotiate that power relationship? Like it or not, teachers have power over the children in their classes. I mean, anybody who has a child knows that the trouble that you could have with a teacher who is powerful. But one of the things that teachers need to realize, and which needs to be taught at undergraduate level, is the idea of informed consent. We are very patronizing towards the learners at school. We ask the parents' permission. We ask the headmaster's permission. We even go so far as to get a letter from the Western Cape Education Department to say we have permission to do the research. But do we ask the learner? And this is where the concept of assent comes in. So it's not consent, it's assent, where the learner themselves is able to give permission. Now, you ask yourself, that this causes huge problems. I'm a teacher in the class. I want to try something, an intervention, and I want to try it out on my learners, and then I want to test them, and I want to see what the outcome was. Where does consent and assent come in? It comes in with the publication of the results. It comes in with keeping the results confidential, not harming the child by plastering the results all over the school and saying this child is stupid or this child has a problem, or so you have to get permission to share the data or not share the data, and whether or not you give feedback to the parents, that is all where it comes into play. All right. Most research that is done is usually voluntary when it comes to research, proper postgraduate research projects or research projects that are run by academics. And all participants have the right to sign a letter of consent and then have the right to withdraw if they are feeling uncomfortable. But this leads us straight into the idea of that power dynamic. Does the child have the right to say to a teacher, or even a teacher who is a pre-service teacher who comes into the class doing teaching practice and wants to do an assignment that the lecturer has given them using the children as guinea pigs? Does that teacher, that learner in that class, have the right to say, no, I don't feel comfortable? Do they? No. You see, these are the questions we need to grapple with. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's not normative. There's no right or wrong answer here. Okay, so obviously confidentiality and anonymity is very important in research ethics in the classroom. Anonymity is impossible to ensure because you know your participants, but you have to make sure that the teachers know that everything is confidential. And that includes discussing things in the classroom, in the staff room. Teachers are very good at chatting in the staff room and not really being very ethical about certain statements that they make. And then, okay, conflict of interest. Now, this is the one that always gets me. When we think of conflict of interest, we always think financial. You know, we sign a conflict, we sign no conflict of interest when we attend meetings, which usually refers to work of ours that is being presented in a committee meeting. But in business ethics, in normal ethics, it relates to funding and money and incentives. But in teaching, it's slightly different. Conflict of interest can rear its very ugly head when it comes to bias. And it comes to the idea that there are social benefits which will be granted to the teacher if certain things can happen. There is the idea of making sure that marks are a certain way so that you can get promoted. So can you see where the fine line between professional ethics and research ethics become blurred? So conflict of interest needs to take into account the fact of this power relation between learners and teachers, and also look at the fact that the only consideration in any school project is the learner. They are the primary consideration. Nothing else should be be at the forefront. And as part of the metacognitive processes that were spoken about yesterday, teachers need to reflect on their biases. They need to have a practice where they not only reflect on their teaching and their classroom management, but also on their biases that might affect the way they treat learners in their classroom because of class average, because of gender considerations. Boys are better at maths than girls. They need to really address their own biases, and this is something that is critical and links with critical literacy and teaching learners, pre-service teachers, to think critically about their own biases. And a lot of the research that I'm currently involved in is about decolonizing the classroom and the curriculum and looking at how teachers specifically address their own biases towards the learners in their classroom. And that relates back to the research that they do for their own professional development or for, whatever research they're doing in the classroom. Bringing it one step back again to the pre-service teacher and teaching them going into the industry how to do this so that they don't go in and carry the weight of their biases with them. Not all of them are biased, but it's something that needs to be addressed. Then the last aspect of ethical research is the idea of giving feedback. So I'll use myself as an example. Many, many years ago, when I was a novice teacher, had just started teaching, 1997, so that gives my age away. I had a group of learners in my classroom, and I was doing B.Ed honors. And my lecturer at university told me, go and administer this questionnaire. And you're going to then do a t-test to see whether this questionnaires answers are related to the marks and whether there's a correlation. And the test was a test anxiety questionnaire to see were the marks related to test anxiety. And I had one little boy in my class. I'll never forget him. He had very high test anxiety and very low marks. I wrote my report, I handed it in, I got my distinction, I never thought about it again. And I always, to this day, almost 25 years later, I still wonder about that young boy. It was not ethical not to give feedback. It was not ethical of me not to at least address it with his parents or to offer some sort of remediation or to do something with that information. So ethically, feedback is so important when it comes to research and research in the classroom. When I did my B.Ed honors, I don't think we even touched on ethics. It's scary to think that in 25 years, we've only now realizing the importance of ethics in subjects or disciplines outside of medicine. Or I know that there are ethical protocols with law and business, but other realms. And it's scary for me to think that our teachers are going into classrooms without professional ethics or research ethics backup. Okay, so the bottom line is, for teaching, undergraduate preparation, and in-service teaching, we need ethical codes of conduct. At the beginning, they spoke about the different literacies that the library works with. I wanted to call it ethical literacy, but then I thought, no, you can't say ethical literacy, it's ethics literacy. We need ethics literacy. We need that added to the growing group of literacies that our students have. So it's not only for professionalism, where we tend to focus very normatively, but also for research in the classroom, which is more of an ethics of care. And we need to prepare teachers. So now, how does this relate back to the library? What role would the library play in this? So the library always has a supportive role. There's always collaboration and support. Everything that is done in research, whether that be from data management to literature searches, the library is embedded in research. And we need to train librarians in the ethics of research too, because it is an embedded field, and the librarians need to be, as they are supportive with normal research activities, be supportive with the ethics of research too. So it's this embedded notion of research ethics. The librarians need to learn, listen to me, you need to learn. So it would be helpful if the librarians were able to not only learn the theory of ethics, but learn the situatedness of ethics. And that ethics is not only about data management, it's also about raising awareness and working together with research partners. My solution, and what I'm working towards with my PhD student, is to create a module which will look at ethics of research in undergraduate pre-service teacher training. This is just some ideas that I've had. We're busy working towards it now, looking at benchmarking with universities in Australia, who are some of the only universities in the world who have ethics modules for pre-service teachers. But looking at things like the Belmont Report and the Declaration of Helsinki that were created around the idea of protecting medical participants. That idea of, as I said before, ethics as a disposition, ethics as a duty, and ethics as utilitarian, not for show, but for practical use. And then, of course, obviously teaching the fundamentals of what research and research ethics entail. What this module will look like, whether it be a workshop, an 8-week course, a year course, a semester course, we don't know yet, but we need buy-in, and we need the library's buy-in too. And yeah, that's my talk for today, and I say thank you very much.